I'll be discussing equitable education for English language learners. So who are ELLs? ELL stands for English Language Learner, and this is a very diverse group of students. Academically, they can have a variety of skills. Linguistically, speak many different languages. And culturally and socioeconomically, they fall into a wide range. However, they all have in common that they come to school with a first language other than English. In addition, their English proficiency has not yet reached grade level. On this graph, we can see that ELLs make up 25% of the student body in the state of California. When looking at this dashed line that represents the national average of 6.9, we can see that the ELLs are significantly greater in California than any other state in the nation. This pie chart shows that of the ELLs, Spanish is predominantly the language spoken at home. So why does it matter to consider English language learners' categorization? What does being an English learner have to do with academics? Well, ELLs face significant challenges because they're learning content in English while at the same time learning English itself. So unfortunately, this means that in the state of California, ELLs are less successful than their native English-speaking peers. I'll show you a graph of that in a moment. In addition, there has been concern about misrepresentation of minority students, particularly ELLs, in special education classes because sometimes they look like they're delayed when really they're still learning. The main takeaway from this lesson is that unmediated instruction for ELLs is not equitable. That means that teachers and policymakers must consider adapting instruction for ELLs. Otherwise, treating students all equally will virtually guarantee that we produce unequal outcomes at the end of schooling because for ELLs, they're starting at a different point. This is an interesting graph that shows that English language learners underperform their English-only counterparts. However, once they're reclassified, meaning that they have passed a test showing that they are now English proficient, they actually outperform the English-only students. California's current policy states that English language learners should acquire proficiency in English as rapidly and effectively as possible. In addition, within a reasonable amount of time, they should achieve the same rigorous grade level academic standards expected of other students. California uses the English Language Proficiency Assessment for California, or the LPAC, to determine if a student is of ELL status. They take this test every year until they pass it, in which case they then become reclassified, or that orange line we saw on the graph earlier. Parents will tell the school that Spanish or another language is spoken at home, and that's when the LPAC is administered. When it's not passed, the student is considered an ELL and receives services accordingly every year until they pass. In addition, the state of California has a unique requirement that teachers with ELLs in their classroom must have some sort of education to accommodate for them. So one of these ways is through the cross-cultural language and academic development, or CLAD authorization. I personally have the opportunity to get that authorization through my credential program and can teach ELL students. I'm now going to discuss 4 different models of instruction for English language learners. I'll be coming back and forth to this visual to show you how they differ and compare them. First, we're going to discuss these two, transitional and dual language immersion, as they both fall under the bilingual education heading. So the first bilingual method that I'm going to discuss is called transitional bilingual education. Um, this is structured in a special class. The literacy and academic content areas are taught in the student's native language while developing at the same time oral proficiency in English. So as English proficiency is gained, more academic subjects are taught in English. And the native language, say in California, Spanish, is phased out. Usually by grade 3, these students will then rejoin the mainstream classrooms, and so it is called early exit bilingual education. Looking at our visual again, keep in mind English learners are blue and English proficient is purple. The transitional bilingual education program that I just described is here. Students that are English learners are in a separate class away from English proficient students until they join them after they've shown that they are proficient. Meanwhile, before showing proficiency, they are taught in their native language, which is phased out gradually. The next bilingual education method is called the two-way dual language immersion. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's very unique. It's composed of approximately 50% native English speakers and 50% speakers of another language. In California, that would be Spanish. So academic instruction takes place in both languages so that all students have the opportunity to be native language models and second language learners. So ELLs would then teach their native English speakers, and native English speakers would be teaching ELLs English. The non-English language is used at least 50% of the time. So this might be on alternating days, or it might be alternating times of the day, like mornings and then afternoons. Dual language immersion is what I just described and is here on this part of the visual. You can see that it is in the integrated section of the visual because they are in the same class teaching each other two separate languages. Something that's very unique about this program is that the goal is biliteracy. So that means that they are trying to maintain the native language, whereas in all the other programs that I'm going to discuss today, English acquisition is the main goal, and it's not really, their concern is not to maintain the native language. The next two models that I'm going to describe fall under the English language instruction style, and that means that there's no second language involved at all. This is the most common style used in California schools today. It is called sheltered English, and it is what I was taught when I earned my CLAD certification. It is sometimes referred to as content English language development or content ELD, which we'll see used again later. In this method, ELLs are in the same class as their English speaking counterparts, and English is used to provide all academic content, math, science, social studies. Gestures and visual aids are used to adapt instruction to the English proficiency level of the students. So anchor charts and lots of other methods of instruction like video and song are used. Differentiation is highly stressed, which means that teachers are taught to accommodate for each individual student's level of English understanding. And lastly, the native language is not used or maintained in this method. Back to our visual, the sheltered English that I just described falls at the bottom right side of the visual, and you can see that it is in the integrated section with a goal of English acquisition, as students ELLs and English proficients are in the same classroom, but they're all speaking English and maintaining no native. The second English language instruction. And last model that I will describe is called the English as a Second Language, or ESL, pull-out style. So in this instructional method, students spend part of the day in the mainstream classroom just as they would with sheltered English. However, they're pulled out by maybe a specialized teacher who could possibly have the CLAD authorization, and they're taken usually to a small group setting for a block of time that is likely to be the same block of time where their English speaking counterparts are learning English as well. Um, and the instruction is accommodated to the student's current abilities, just as with the sheltered English. Again, the native language is not used or maintained. In the visual again, we see the pull-out or standalone ESL services. It is considered segregated because the English learner is pulled out and does not work with directly the English proficient student. Looking at several meta-analyses that also looked at several studies themselves, bilingual education has an effect size of 0.27. So this is above the English immersion and English instruction styles, but does not actually reach the hinge point as described by Hattie in our textbook called Visual Learning. However, a lot of schools choose not to use bilingual education for probably a variety of different reasons. One being that it is expensive to implement and the effect size is not very high. So the cost benefit analysis would not indicate that it would be worthwhile. In addition, it's very hard to find bilingual teachers. Or understanding the composition of the ELLs within a school district might make barriers. For example, there could be a huge variety of languages and only a small amount of students within each language that prevent them from having separate classes. In addition, access to quality bilingual curriculum is really difficult, especially if there are a variety of languages. This graph shows a comparison of the long-term achievement by the various program models that I described. So it actually gives a couple more that I did not go over, but the pull-out ESL is one. You can see that it is at the bottom of the achievement. Content ELD is the sheltered English I described, which is this purple line. Early exit transitional I described being TBE, transitional bilingual education, and it is this light blue line. I did not talk about late exit or one-way dual, but I did talk about two-way dual, and you can see it is this dark blue. So the results show in this graph that over the long term, students in classrooms taught in two languages not only catch up to their English counterparts, but they eventually surpass them, both academically and linguistically. So here, right here, is this dashed blue line represents English-speaking students that were not ELLs at all. And you can see that the two-way dual students actually surpass that line. One question you might have after looking at this graph is, why don't we implement two-way dual immersion in all schools? So part of the answer is what I just discussed earlier about the barriers of bilingual education. However, some of it is in response to debates that center around cultural assimilation ideas and attitudes. So while we know that most English language learners should be proficient in English when they graduate from high school, the debate is whether or not people in America should all assimilate to American culture. So those who feel that assimilation is the goal would then emphasize English only styles of instruction. Whereas those who favor acculturation, meaning that there's like a sharing of components from culture to culture, they are more in favor of bilingual development. That is all for the lesson. Thank you for watching.